In this session, let's understand about Code Inspector. It's a tool provided by SAP which allows you to quickly check your program for various issues. For example, to demonstrate this, let me quickly write one code. Let's say I'll write one select query without a where condition. Now, when you are going through this code, generally when you develop your application in the development system, before you move it to a production system, a senior developer will do a code review. So when he's doing this review, he'll quickly use these tools to perform various checks, because if you have written 2,000-3,000 lines of code, then he may not be able to go through each line of code to see what mistakes you are doing. So somewhere in the code, if you have written a select without a where clause, then if he manually scans the code, he may not be able to find that statement. He may easily miss that statement. So what we do is, generally when we are doing this code review, especially, we'll quickly run these checks. If you go to program check, we have different checks like code inspector, extended program check. If you run code inspector, then it will perform different checks, and ideally there should be 0 errors and 0 warnings. So if I expand under performance checks, it's showing 1 error, and if I expand this folder, it says analysis of where condition, and if I click on this information button, it will display the analysis of that error. Okay, so since we have used a select without a where clause, it is pointing to that error. So before you submit your code for review, you have to typically run these checks to ensure that there are 0 errors and 0 warnings. Otherwise, the senior developer who's reviewing your code will simply send it back to you and ask you to fix these errors. So it will do different checks, such as select statements that bypass the table buffer. If your buffer is available for a particular table, and if you are using certain statements such as bypass buffer, or if your select is not constructed in a way where it can use the buffer, then it will point to those errors. And if you use if you're processing internal tables, and if you're not using this binary key to search your internal tables, or if you're using a linear search, then it will perform. And if that table is expected to have a lot of data, and if you're using a linear search, then it will point to those errors also. So it performs various checks such as performance checks, security checks, syntax checks, and all these things. So before submitting your program for review, you quickly run this code inspector to ensure that there are no errors that can be easily avoidable. And we'll focus more on the performance related checks. So we'll be more particular about you're not writing any select queries that will impact the performance of the program, or if you're using internal tables, you're using hash tables or using secondary keys if you're processing tables that can have a lot of data in them. So don't just use standard tables everywhere. If you feel a particular table has a lot of data and you're processing that within a loop, if you're reading one internal table within a loop, and if that table which you're reading has millions of records, then it makes sense for you to use these secondary keys for the table. If you cannot use the table itself as a hash table, at least use a hash secondary key so that your performance can be improved. So this is a quick check that we perform. So if you want to perform a code inspector check, simply select it from the menu, program, check, code inspector, and it will run a check and tell you if there are any bottlenecks that can be avoided. So that's your code inspector. In the next video, I'll talk about extended program check. So see you in the next session.